Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. A very special exhibit opens this weekend at the St. Louis Science Center, commemorating a monumental historic event and the St. Louis role in it. The event is the moon landing of July 1969. One of history's most famous lines, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, words uttered by astronaut Neil Armstrong when he stepped onto the moon's surface. Fellow astronaut Buzz Aldrin followed while Michael Collins piloted the command module above them. The Science Center exhibit is titled Destination Moon, the Apollo 11 Mission. It includes artifacts and hardware from the mission and opens Saturday for a 5-month run. I spoke yesterday with Christian Greer, Chief Officer for Science Education and Experience at the Science Center. Henry Brownlee manages the historical services with Boeing. I began by asking Greer where the center is in getting the exhibit ready.
It's a good question. I went down this morning just to try to look at the progress of everything, and just about all of our major exhibit pieces are installed, and they're just doing some of the finishing touches, putting up the super graphics, which will be environmental treatments to make you feel like you're in space or on the moon. And I think the people will love it. It's an immersive exhibit. It's an exciting exhibit, and it's one with historical significance here, even in St. Louis.
I understand a moon rock has just been brought back to be a part of all of this.
Yes. Our collections manager, Christina Hampton, brought the moon rock up from Houston, so we're very happy that NASA was able to loan it to us for people to actually see an artifact from the surface of the moon, which is exciting. And I'm sure it's interesting getting it through airport security, but it's a fun thing to be able to see and to talk about that we have here in St. Louis.
Give us a quick overview, if you will, of what people will find at the exhibit.
Well, one thing that's really exciting about this exhibit is in 2016 we became a Smithsonian affiliate, and we certainly wanted to try to take a full advantage of that here in St. Louis. Never thought we would be able to get the Columbia command module from Apollo 11, but we did secure that exhibit, and Smithsonian allowed us for the 5,000 square foot exhibit that they've brought here to the St. Louis Science Center. They allowed us to augment the exhibit with another 8,000 square feet of exhibit artifacts and environmental components. And so it's broken up into several parts, and the entry experience is a St. Louis themed street where you will see artifacts from the 1960s that you'll be able to go through, and then you'll walk into a house in which we've sort of depicted a launch and landing party for those that remember the flights to the moon. They may have remembered sitting in their living rooms watching their colored television sets or black and white television sets and watching the launch, and so we'll be depicting that. We have videos, we have activities, and then on the back end of the exhibit, when you exit, you get a chance to test to see if you will actually have the right stuff. So there'll be a walk-in lunar module and a sit-in command module for kids and adults alike to explore.
Henry, I think St. Louis should probably be flattered that it was one of 4 cities chosen to have an exhibit like this. But St. Louis had to be one of the cities, given our background in space exploration.
Yeah, you would think so. Given St. Louis's work on the Mercury and the Gemini, not so much as Apollo, but they did support them in that way. But they didn't do a lot of work here on Apollo. But you would think that they would be included in the group.
Of course, the moonshot could not have happened were it not for those earlier space efforts that McDonnell Douglas, before Boeing acquired, did most of that work.
Yeah, I would be shocked if our Douglas historian didn't tell you that just McDonnell Aircraft, not McDonnell Douglas, did the Mercury and Gemini. But McDonnell did a wonderful job on the Mercury and Gemini, and they really set up the whole space program for NASA.
Is Boeing represented at all in the Science Center exhibit?
Yes. A major guy from the community guy, Jim Bafara, I believe, has talked to you guys, and Boeing is supporting the new exhibit with these guys. Yeah, for the Science Center.
In what way, Christian?
Well, we have a feature where we talk about the future of space flight. So from people that have seen rockets go off recently and launched from the Cape, or in West Texas and other places, and they've talked about going to the moon, back to the moon, or to Mars, they may not realize that right here in St. Louis, Boeing is working on that next generation of spacecraft, the CT-100 Starliner, and also a new spacesuit, which you can find online on their website that they've shown. And we actually had a chance to display it here at the Science Center, and we're going to try to get it for the exhibit. So what does the future of space look like? I think we want to try to show people what that's going to be like. And in the exhibit, we preview the Starliner and other spacecraft that are featured from Boeing.
Let's talk about the future a little bit later. Let's talk about the past now. I'll get back to this exhibit. What is involved in getting something like this to St. Louis? We were talking about stuff that is invaluable historically and in many different ways. I mean, you just don't put it in a trunk and just call the FedEx folks, do you?
Right. So FedEx did the delivery, and
Really?
they had some specific ways in which they got the capsule here, and it had to be packed a certain way. And the collections managers and conservation folks from Smithsonian are on hand to make sure that the climate that the exhibit in Boeing Hall is going to be in is perfect for this historical artifact. It has to be displayed in a certain kind of lighting. We need to make sure that the capsule, the floor that it's on and the ramp going in has the right specifications to handle the weight. And more specifically, we want to make sure that the capsule is viewable to the public. And in many places, in many museums around the country where they have Apollo capsules or other space capsules, they are usually shrouded in a plexiglass case. And what we are so excited that Smithsonian was able to do for us is to have it be in the open air. You'll be walking right up next to the capsule, and you'll be able to see it without any plexiglass, without a specific case or anything, and just take it all in. And that's what's exciting.
No hands-on, though.
No hands-on, right. That's why we built sort of the other capsules to get inside.
I am surprised that temperature is such an issue for something like the capsule. I mean, it's a pretty big piece of equipment.
It's a great question, because you think, re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and you're hitting the atmosphere at probably greater than 17,500 miles an hour to slow down. That's a pretty hot spacecraft, and it has its heat shield is obviously worn away, which you'll be able to see when you see the capsule and come to the exhibit. And it's funny because I'm thinking, wow, we have so many rules for conservation, for collections management, because it's a priceless artifact. But in the back of our minds, all of us are thinking, heck, this thing went through the Earth's atmosphere, coming from the moon. It shouldn't require so much support. But, unfortunately, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of this mission. And so it's important to keep this priceless artifact of human history as well as American history in good hands.
It's a great educational tool. The entire exhibition,
Yes.
It can be called a tool, I suppose. And you are encouraging a lot of visitors from kids.
We are. I think I was thinking the other day with the history that Henry talked about with McDonnell Aircraft, and we actually have two other capsules, the Mercury and Gemini capsules, which were trainers that are on loan to us from the Smithsonian that were built right here in St. Louis that are on a planetarium side. So this is kind of interesting in that we have the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo in one building, which is exciting, or one facility. But ultimately, I think when you talk to astronauts and people that have been in space, they will say that they got some of their earliest sort of experiences from air shows and museums or science centers. And the idea that a science center could play a role in the future of space exploration, and those folks that are engineers and scientists and astronauts that will be going into space, wouldn't it be great for the first person to walk or set foot on Mars to be a kid from St. Louis? And we think this exhibit might be the thing to get them inspired to be able to do just that.
Well, we have a young lady who lives in St. Louis who has signed up for one of those early Mars missions if it ever happens in the next couple of years, and she's willing to make that one-way trip. So who knows?
It's amazing, yeah.
Henry, what have you been learning and getting ready for Boeing's involvement in all of this about the actual mission itself? I was looking at some material yesterday and just was astounded once again at all that was involved and all that had to go right to make this thing work.
Yeah, so like you said, a lot has to go right. You have to get the ship in just the right attitude and all this sort of thing, the right speed, to hit certain windows to get the craft up and to the moon. Once it's there, you have to get in a certain position to have it land correctly, and then you only have some certain amount of time to get it back up, to get it back to Earth. So it's a lot that goes on that has to go right, or either you can't do it.
Can you imagine being a part of a trip like that and having to sweat out all these things that had to go right?
No, I can't imagine that. The astronauts had to entrust a lot to the makers of the actual Apollo program, because if they didn't, they'd be sitting on top of their rocket nervous all the time. So, they had to trust the people who actually built the aircraft, or the spacecraft, which they did.
Who could blame them for being nervous? Kristen, and all your preparation for this, what have you learned maybe that you didn't know about that mission?
Well, I think one of the more interesting things is just the time, the period. And for those that weren't alive during that period, it's hard to get a feel for the space race, the Cold War at that time, and the national pride that was associated with this. And then you land on the moon and you put a plaque saying that we came in peace for all of mankind, really expanded that mission to go beyond just nations, but a feat that was achieved by human beings. And I think about some of the great voyages, whether it's the Endurance and Shackleton's Antarctic adventure, or the Nina and the Columbus voyages, or other ships that you mark as great travels from one place to the next. This capsule that we have here, the Columbia Command Module, is such a small vessel to travel so far, 250,000 miles to another, one way to another heavenly body, an object in space, our closest neighbor in space, the moon, and come back safely is amazing. Because it's, you could hardly really even call it a ship. It's really
how big. What are the dimensions like for the capsule and for the lander?
It's a good question. As you see the capsule here,
we have models in front of us.
Yeah, we have models. Yeah, I should say when you see, we have models here that represent sort of the three major modules. The command module, which is sort of the conical shape that you see on top of the Saturn V rocket. That's the vehicle that will actually be on display. The service module, which is the vehicle that propelled them to the moon and back. And then the lunar lander, or the LEM, which people are most familiar with. And the actual capsule is probably about 8 or 9 feet tall, but it's on casters and a ring that supports its space. And then I believe the lunar module is about 30 feet up. And so with the legs fully extended. And you wouldn't imagine that you would have a lot of room in these spaces. But when you get into space and you get into weightlessness, you're not confined to the floor or to your seats. You can float around. You can move underneath places. And so what might be the equivalent of the space that you would find in an SUV, in weightlessness, it doubles and triples sort of the feel of that space.
You've got all the square footage.
Yeah, you can move around in the ceiling and go into a corner and feel relatively comfortable there. But sleeping on the moon was a little bit challenging. It takes time for the astronauts to get accustomed to weightlessness. But they even remarked on later flights that they were excited when they finally were landing on the moon to be back in a G field, or a gravitational field, even though it's only 1/6 that of Earth on the moon.
The lander was nicknamed the Eagle. Neil Armstrong said the Eagle has landed.
The Eagle has landed,
famously.
right.
You have, among the artifacts that you have will have on display, is also a survival kit. I was kind of surprised to see that. They had 2 days to survive if they landed in the wrong place coming back.
Well, that's a great thing to bring up, because for those that saw the movie Hidden Figures, where the mathematicians were working on the trajectory, of the trajectory of the lander for John Glenn's flight, which is one of the many of the other flights, but that was the one that was really highlighted in the film. It's possible, if the reentry wasn't at the right angle or attitude, as Henry mentioned, that you could end up somewhere else. And given that you've got 78% or so of the Earth's surface is covered by water, they probably had a good chance of landing in water. But in case they didn't, and they landed in a foreign country or a place where maybe they weren't welcome, or maybe it would take time for helicopters and other rescue vehicles to get there, they needed a survival kit. So we'll have the survival kit on display. It has a machete, it has food, it has sunglasses,
Right.
lots of things, medical kits, things that you might think you would need. The ultimate prepper's kit, I guess, for a moon landing vehicle.
Henry, you seem kind of tickled by that.
I mean, if you don't land on water and you land on land, that machete, that's a good thing to have. But, I'd rather have a gun or something like that because you said it was in the middle of the Cold War, right? So you would be on enemy land someplace. But, I mean, I'm sure they did the best they could do. I mean, that was good to have,
Yeah.
Right, and perhaps the machete was used to fight against the jungle if you
Right,
you
could
know,
be
to,
the jungle, right.
to make a clearing or something for a helicopter to land to rescue you, or so those kinds of things I think are important. And what's interesting is the engineers have thought of so many different things, so many possibilities, and you see it depicted in Apollo 13 when they didn't to come back and they couldn't land. How do you get 3 people home?
Is there any interactive elements to the display?
Yes, one of the interactive elements is a way to talk back to the different capsules. So we have a mission control space, we have the lunar module, and we have the command module. You can actually push a button and say, Eagle, this is Houston. What's your attitude? Where are you located? When are you going to get out and explore the moon? And so we think kids and adults alike will be talking back and forth to different capsules, and that'll be fun. And we also have a way to test to see whether you have the right stuff. And we worked with the Clark Planetarium in Utah to help build us some video simulations of a lunar lander. So you'll get a chance to try that out and see if you could land on the moon like Neil Armstrong did.
You two are too young to remember the moon landing, but I'm not. And the two things that come to my mind beyond the sensational aspect of landing a man on the moon was Walter Cronkite of CBS became very, very emotional when the men landed on the moon. The only other time he got emotional on the air was when the Kennedy assassination.
Well, that's right.
And speaking of Kennedy, the moon landing kind of deflected the attention that the Chappaquiddick incident involving Ted Kennedy, which is getting a lot of publicity now because of the movie, that had happened 2 days before the moon landing. So that left page one because as a result of all of this.
Yeah, Cronkite was a rock, and in terms of being a media icon. And I can remember watching just recently the video of that broadcast, of which we feature that in the actual exhibit. He and Wally Schirra, I think another one of the Mercury astronauts, were there in the studio when it went down, and you could see him just kind of like wipe his brow, take his glasses off, and say, "Whoa, we're home." I think is what he said, and it's interesting just to think about that. Do we have a home in space, and to what extent did these missions help us establish that as perhaps an interplanetary species at some point?
As our time winds down, let me go back to Henry here and go back to the future that we mentioned a little while ago. Give us some sense of what Boeing is working on right now for the future.
Well, just quickly, Boeing is involved in what's called the Space Launch System. That is the missile that will take the Orion and any other capsule either to Mars or to the moon. So Boeing is working on that. It's not here in St. Louis, but they are working on that. Boeing has also made a couple of test capsules for the CS-100, which is Boeing's capsule that's supposed to go back and forth to the moon. It's a cruise space launcher, and Boeing is working on that. Again, they did the trainers here in St. Louis, but the capsule will be built elsewhere. I think it's in Huntington Beach in California right now. But those are the two main things that Boeing is working on right now. And some other things which obviously I can't mention, but they're working on those right now to get Americans back into space. So
nothing going on here in St. Louis per se. It's all happening out of
trainers, which they did, and they're done with those now. No, not that I know of.
A lot of people, I think, are under the impression that America's kind of gotten out of the space business, but that's not the case.
I don't think that's the case, not for Boeing.
And, Kristen, as you say, maybe this will inspire some young people in St. Louis to want to continue with whatever program is left.
I hope so. And, we need a vision for these kinds of things. It's because these are projects that sometimes go 10 or 20 years, what is the foundation that is needed to explore? What questions do we have about the composition of the surface of planets? Is there life out there in our solar system? And these are things that I think this next generation of sort of digital natives, I guess, and kids that are comfortable with computers and thinking about out of the box through design thinking, they're going to take us to the future. We're excited to be able to have them here in St. Louis as a town with a lot of innovation, and perhaps they can lead the way.
Thanks to Christian Greer from the Science Center and Henry Brownlee from Boeing. Destination Moon, the Apollo 11 mission, opens Saturday at the Science Center and runs through early September. Archive versions of past St. Louis On the Air programs are available for download or podcast at stlpublicradio.org/stlonair. St. Louis On the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Thank you for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.